This is Audible.
This is wonderful to have an intimate group again after quite a long time. I can look at everybody. We can exchange hugs. Just got back a few days ago from a week-long retreat in New York with close to 400 people. In some ways, one could say that this little retreat is experimental. The form of it is experimental. It seems we are going to address questions arising from working with people, having groups, working with individuals. That's the form or the content, and that's new. What is not experimental is the essence of this retreat, and no matter whether this is the only one of this kind that is ever going to happen, or whether this particular form of retreat is the first of many, or whether it will develop into something else, the form is always secondary anyway, because the form is the content, whatever we talk about. Helpful, yes, helpful pointers, and yet that's not the essence of our retreat. The essence is the state of presence. If you can dwell in presence, whatever you need to know will come out of that. And more important than any of the things that we may talk about tonight is to recognize the depth of the state of presence and what it is that keeps you from living in presence as a continuous state. Because the moment you live in presence as a continuous state or predominant state, you are a teacher, as the Course in Miracles calls it, a teacher of God, whether you have formal groups or not. You cannot not teach presence when you live in presence. Teach in a wider sense. Whoever you meet is affected by presence. And we are here also to recognize what it is that keeps us from living in presence. And that is our belief in thought, not recognizing the relative nature of all thought, and completely believing in whatever thought arises in your mind. So we are here also to become aware of our relationship with thought, particularly this weekend. And I'll be reminding you of that. The non-recognition that every thought that arises in your mind is a perspective, a viewpoint from one angle. It can never encapsulate the whole. It always is a fragment of the totality. Not seeing that, you become identified, drawn into, trapped by a fragmented way of being in the world. Your sense of self clings especially to long-held thoughts and thought patterns. Like a bulldog, not going to let go of this one, because you derive a sense of self from identification with that. Not recognizing that it is a perspective. No more. You could move a few steps, metaphorically speaking, and you would see the same reality from a different perspective. I believe it was in the 70s, early 70s, a young girl called Patricia Hearst got kidnapped by terrorists, and after spending a few months with them, being kidnapped, and they must have spoken to her, she suddenly took part in bank robberies and so on. She became one of them. They explained to her their perspective, their viewpoint. And they explained, no, your perspective was totally wrong. The system is actually evil. It's not us who are evil. It's the system that's evil, can't you see? And then it gives you the reasons why the system. It's not difficult to convince you that the system is evil, easy. It's a fragment of the truth. And if you get drawn into a fragment, that is, becomes you, especially those ones that you've bitten into, and they are long-held beliefs or whatever it may be, on politics, diets, men, women, money, power, and then this is absolutely true. Stepping back from thought internally, 1 or 2 steps back, and there are thoughts. Quite useful sometimes, useless at other times. And seeing that not one thought could encapsulate the whole, the totality. And you don't have to work out some kind of answer in your mind that explains the totality, the whole, some kind of system of thought. They tried it. A system of thought that explains it all. Communism was something like that. It could explain everything. Everything you could explain from that particular perspective. Any event would suddenly make sense. He would explain it. And then you try to impose the system on reality. So the greatest freedom is the freedom from thought, which first of all means not recognizing the relativity of thought. You're not free. Never being able to stop thinking. That's the essence of bondage. And your effectiveness as, for lack of a better word, as a teacher depends to a large extent on your relationship with thought and your non-identification with thought. You don't need to demand that you should be free of thought from now on, or no. Just step back from it and see its relative nature. Anything that you cling to in the realm of thought eventually will obscure your ability to teach, to hold presence. And sooner or later, at some point, it'll come up and you'll be defending yourself, defending your viewpoint, defending your position. And it's quite something to separate yourself from that. Enormous. You can notice a clinging, yes, okay, I'll let go of, but not that one, not this one. Surely that's right, what I believe about this situation or this person or that. Surely that's right. Another way of putting it is that no thought is dreadfully important. As I sometimes put it, don't take your thoughts too seriously. As you sit here and the rest of the weekend, it's just thought. You are so much vaster than that. Tonight, this is just a meditation. It doesn't look like a meditation, but it is. A meditation takes you out of identification with thought. And then tomorrow we'll be ready to use thought when it comes. Maybe occasionally recognize that we have identified with a position, a mental position. It's become a thought, has become a me, has become a self. And then emotion comes in. It's energized by emotion. I am, that is me, I must defend myself. And watch that. Tonight, we are simply stepping out of thought. It's just a step back, 1 or 2 steps back. Perhaps you can sense your body as you sit here. The aliveness in the energy field of the body. And it's easier to step back. And outside of thought, there is no problem, and you have no problem. All problem is thought. So the moment you step out of thought, identification with thought, is also the realization that you have no problem. Ever. Now. It's the collapse of a problematic sense of self. It dissolves. And what's left, when there are no problems, are occasional challenges. But only in the now. They cannot be anywhere else. Now, this moment, is there a challenge? And you will recognize a challenge that is. And with every challenge, your alertness rises. You wake up a bit more intense presence. And you may all be at this stage already where that is possible, instead of a challenge pulling you into more complete identification with thought and all the mental, emotional, reactive patterns, all strengthening a false sense of me, of self. Instead, the challenge, something goes wrong, you lose something, a difficult person, whatever form a challenge takes, if things are not going the way they should be, that's a pseudo-challenge, because the mind has created how things should be, and then it's... If it's a true challenge, you face it. And there's an alertness in which it happens. And there's no reference to thought as to how am I going to solve this challenge, what am I going to do about it. There's contact with an intelligence greater than thought. Alert stillness. No working out. And out of that arises insight, realization, or right action. No longer right action, trying to figure out right and wrong. What's right and wrong? Through the mind. And the mind can justify anything. That is right. The terrorists will justify this is right. Easy to find justifications, further thought to substantiate your position of rightness. So trying to figure out right and wrong through thought is impossible. In the Quran it says, "Thou shalt not kill." But unfortunately the sentence continues, "except for a just cause." Well, and then thought comes in. Of course I have a just cause, let me tell you why. And you lose the feeling of aliveness, because while I'm telling you why mine is a just cause, I get trapped more and more in a world of mental conceptualization. I can no longer sense that which is beyond concept. Life, the aliveness in each human being, completely deadened through that. And I'm explaining why this is a just cause. So the terrorist does that in an extreme form. He deadens a group of people through putting labels on them, concepts, and totally identified with them. You can no longer sense their aliveness, and you don't sense your own aliveness anymore, because the moment you trap other people in the mental labels, you've trapped yourself. You can do anything and you don't know what you're doing anymore. But everybody has that to some extent, that identification with thought. In a smaller way, nobody in this room would go out and blow up 100 or 1,000 or several thousand people. Nobody is that unconscious. And everybody in this room is already moving out of that. And yet, the root patterns, which are at the core of human unconsciousness, have been for thousands and thousands of years. The root patterns of that are in everyone, and it's only in you that it can be dissolved. And what you've done then is immeasurable. Not just, you haven't done it for yourself, the whole of humanity. One human being becoming free of that has an enormous effect on the rest of humanity. So to see that, and one label, if there's only one label left in you that you completely believe in concerning a situation or person, that one will keep you trapped. And it looks harmless enough, but it'll keep you trapped in thought. It'll be that area where thought clings to you and you cling to thought. And your sense of self clings to thought. The deeper meaning of forgiveness, which is a spiritual term, is no longer clinging to thoughts, because every thought ultimately is a judgment. And wisdom is not judgment, but the relinquishment of judgment. And what then emerges from within you is so much vaster than thought. The state of pure awareness that's already in you. It would be not quite right to think that is something that you need to attain. One could say it is already there underneath thought in you. And never recognized by thought. Thought cannot understand it. And maybe arising in you far more than you realize when you start thinking about whether you live in presence or in awareness or not. No, I don't remember being aware at any time. The mind doesn't understand it. Of course, you can't remember it through thought. And yet you may have walked from the door to where you're sitting now in the state of simple, clear, pure awareness. There's nothing spectacular about it. Or you may have put some sugar in your tea or honey, and there was no thought involved, and not absent-mindedly either, just simple action without the involvement of thought. There may have been the state free of thought when you were listening to somebody sitting next to you at dinner, talking, and pure listening. Perhaps, perhaps not. It is a wonderful thing when you catch yourself, so to speak, in that state, although the danger is that immediately the mind comes in and claims an attainment. I'm there now, I can do it. But to catch yourself it means to become aware directly of awareness. We all know spiritual traditions speak of the state of attention. The Buddhists call it mindfulness. But the most wonderful thing is when you can become aware of that field of alert stillness. And it's not that there's any dualistic relationship here. You are not becoming aware of it. It's only language does that. It becomes aware of itself. And that is that which gives satsang, not you. Oh, that's a relief. I don't have to do it. You don't have to even learn how to do it. You couldn't. Satsang means sangha, company, something like that. Sat means being in the company of being. And no person can give satsang, but only when there's the absence of the person. And what is the person other than identification with thought and thought structures? So to be a highly effective teacher of presence, just don't be there as a person. The slightest clinging to any thought, especially the favorite ones, it keeps you there as a little person. And for a while it may not interfere. There may even be some, and it'll always catch up in obscure presence. You will never feel ready to teach. Or if you see, I'm ready now, that's the greatest delusion. Because it's the mind-made self that says, now it's time to teach. You will always feel inadequate as the little me, but the little me doesn't need to teach. And so you come to love that state of not knowing. Not knowing even how to teach. Not coming from another position that says, I know, or I know the answers. The most powerful teacher doesn't know and is happy with that. I don't need to know how to interpret this moment. And it might be a teaching situation or any moment. Increasingly, being able to live in that way that simply allows totally what is to be. Don't need to interpret in any way. A especially human beings. And your task while you're here is not move away from now. Then thought is superfluous. And while you're here, and quite a few times you may miss it, make nothing into a means to an end. No movement, thinking that the result that I want to achieve through this movement is more important than this movement. The now is not a means to a future end. It is completely full. So while you walk from here to there, to be there in every step. While you drink, take off your shoes. Life consists of that. There's lots full of little things like that. That's the whole of life, really. You're sitting, standing and lying somewhere and doing something, somewhere. But the mind is saying big things about it. There's a huge, vast story that you don't really, this isn't the right moment. The story is going somewhere else. But it's always only all the many little things. That's all there is. And something deeper is there in the little things when you give them your full attention. What is that something deeper? When you're just taking off your shoes, isn't that insignificant? Putting on your shoes. Surely there are more important things than putting on your shoes. What is the deeper thing about putting on your shoes when you give them your full attention? It's the attention in which it happens. That field of bare, alert, still attention, in which a seemingly insignificant thing happens, but compared to the vastness of that field, everything is insignificant that happens. So it doesn't matter whether you encounter that when you put on your shoes, or they give you the Nobel Prize for something. As I saw, they have advertisements for a certain watch, I can't remember what watch, and they call it significant moments. And I don't know what they can express, particularly those moments you look at your watch when you get the Nobel Prize. But those come quite rarely. They come occasionally, big things. Ultimately, no different from small things. And it's not the things, all the little or big things that you do that matter that much. There's something deeper there. And never getting beyond the surface appearance of things. Oh, what a life. And always thinking, well, the next one surely is more important than this one, because I know that this one isn't important. No depth to life. surface phenomenon. The whole of life becomes a surface phenomenon, and you yourself become a surface phenomenon. And then you die. What happened? I must have missed something. Yes, you did. You missed the whole thing. So the importance is not in what happens in your life or doesn't happen. That's all relative importance. Relative importance, yes, but not. One could say what really matters is to whom it happens. One could put it like that. Who are you? Who is this happening to? But there's no answer to that in the head as a concept. So you're putting on your shoes here, getting ready for breakfast, and honor this moment completely, fully. Be there. And you don't need thought. You might have noticed to tie your shoelaces. Thought is not required. So usually you would be thinking about something totally different. Just quickly get this done out of the way because the mind is already there. And instead, be with this. And it won't be long before you notice that to everything that happens, there is a dimension of depth. And everything that happens in that dimension of depth. And that depth is an inner field of stillness. And it's very much alive. It's still. And there you put on your shoes. And then the next thing. Nothing dreadfully important, ever really. And another thing. And instead of losing yourself in the mind, in the next thing, lose yourself in the world, and it's never significant enough, so that's why you always need the next moment. Maybe that one will be more significant than this one. And the completeness is already here. That out of which everything arises. The ground of being is your essence, and it's here. And it's so much greater than anything that happens. Vast. It holds, it encompasses everything. So you know it at first as the alert, still attention in which you look at a flower. It could be an action, or it could be simply a perception. And there's not just the flower there now, because if you don't know the field in which the perception happens, and know yourself as the field in which it happens, then all you know is the form that you see. And the tragic thing is, it's not going to last very long. And so that's sad if you don't know that which is beyond form. And then one day you sit there and you've invited a group of people into your home. And there's just that. And you may look at people, unless they are, you know they're not comfortable with it. Many people are not comfortable with being looked at, because they think when you're looking at them, you're thinking something about them. They don't know that when you're looking at them, there's just the stillness. And that's a transmission of presence. And that is teaching beyond any form. Anything you look at, to just use that particular perception, undergoes changes when you place pure attention on it. Anything, especially humans, and you're not doing anything. And you don't have to do it in an obvious way, so you gaze for 5 minutes. It could just be a few seconds, and they may not even know it. There's simply a field of stillness around the perception. And you don't have to wait for a formal teaching situation to teach. When you look at the supermarket cashier, putting things through the computer that reads the barcode, it could be there. That stillness, and there's just the looking. And there's a transmission of presence, and you're not doing anything. There's not me doing anything. The shortest interaction. And a lot of our lives is to do with brief, we meet many people during the course of the day, brief interactions. Can you bring the field of stillness into each interaction, or are you lost in mind, and so two minds are interacting, thinking they are human beings? Can you bring the field of stillness into each meeting, each encounter, and be there predominantly as the stillness and not as the person? It doesn't mean that you cannot use your form identity when it's needed and speak, but you are there as the essence of who you actually are, not the pseudo-self, the little me. You are there as the field of stillness in any human interaction. And they may try very hard to pull you out of that. Their mind says, don't you see that this matters? Come on, feed me. This thought, can't you see that this thought matters? Come on, let's feed thought together. So the mind will try to draw you into the mind frequency. You know what he did, and you know what he said then, and then, and it matters. The most beautiful teaching situations are not recognized as teaching situations. Teaching in the deepest sense. Through the simple encounters. And it could just be 2 seconds, 3 seconds. And many of you are doing it already, and you may not even know it. I use the word doing, it's not in languages like that. 3 seconds of stillness while you say hello, and there's no thought. There's just a depth. That is true healing, one could say, in the deepest sense. You give them their own reality, and you haven't given anything. You reflect back to them their own reality, and they may not even know it. And of course, as you know, the essence of our gathering here is not what we talk about that we do that anyway, but the essence is to know yourself as the stillness underneath the noise. To know yourself as that. That's the essence. Otherwise you can forget about having groups or anything. Know yourself as that. And the practice here is to simply sit when I'm not speaking. Is there anything that you need to add to this moment? Is there anything that needs to be worked out through the head? The mind might say, I'm not getting enough out of this. It's not enough. What's the next thing? Okay, with stillness, or yes, I understand that now, but what's the next thing? Now, to make that practice a little easier here, I suggest strongly that between the end of our evening session here tonight and the beginning of our morning session tomorrow, that we don't engage in talking. That makes it a little easier to be still. Later, it's not required anymore. You can talk and you can allow others to talk. You don't need to demand that they should be still. But initially, just because we're here to deepen stillness, to know it more fully, be it more fully, it helps occasionally to have a period of non-speaking. And then you can look at things and people. And there's the form of that person. And there's a stillness in which you're perceiving that. And if there's not the stillness, there's no need to condemn yourself and say, I can't get to the stillness. I want to perceive people through the stillness, but there's always some noise going on in my head. It's not working for me. I might as well go home. What to do then? Whatever mental noise is happening while you perceive another human being or anything, you don't take it too seriously. You don't believe in it completely. It's recognized as thought. Thought is still happening. And so there's the perception and there's thought. And so the quickest way out of that is not even trying to get out of it, is allowing the fact that there is mental noise. Not completely believing in it. That allowing creates a space even around the mental noise, that spaciousness, that stillness. So the spaciousness or the stillness can be around the perception, but it can also be even around mental noise, or even around emotional ups and downs, wave movements of emotions. Even there, the spaciousness, which is another pointer for the stillness, another same thing, can be there around an emotion or around mental noise. How can it be there? How can you know the spaciousness around mental noise? Seems to be the absence of spaciousness, the absence of stillness. How can you know it even with it there? And you won't know it as if you knew an object. There it is, because it's the nature of spaciousness that it cannot be pinpointed or grasped. Allowing it to be, because it is at this moment, you allow this moment and whatever is in it to be, and there's the spaciousness. At first, it's just not a complete involvement in the mind streams anymore. And that's the beginning of the arising of the spaciousness, the still spaciousness, around the world of form. Anything, external forms or inner forms, as thoughts or emotions. External forms as situations and people. So you cannot lose yourself completely in mental and emotional forms if you allow them to be. Allow. And this you may forget. You get back home, and the moment you get back home, old patterns may return. And the only thing that you forget there really is the allowing. The allowing refers to this moment. Allow it to be as it is. Not even demand that you should be still. That's a little... can lead you astray too. If you're not still, you allow that. It is. That's how it is. I'm full of mental noise. That's how it is. It is. Noise. And there's a spaciousness. And when that is there, even the mental noise will change. You don't have to do anything. It then subsides because you're no longer involved that much in it. So you could perhaps put a few, until it becomes a normal way to live, you could put little stickers in every room and on your dashboard. Allow this moment. When you go to bed tonight, thought is unimportant. Be in the body, lie there, on your back, enter that field of aliveness. Not much to think about there, just that aliveness that is there in every cell and life. And if you wake up in the middle of the night, my problems next week, immediately go into the body, be there, lie on your back, inhabit the body fully. And first thing in the morning, you wake up, instead of going into here. And if you look clearly, all that, if you go into here, it'll be connected with some after 2 or 3 minutes, the first problem will be there. And another, and another. Go and be in the body and lie there. And so that's a practice. You go to sleep from there. If you wake up, immediately you go into the body. Intensely hold it, hold that. And first thing in the morning, lie in that field, that energy field, and then get up. You find yourself getting up suddenly. And then the alertness that is then there goes with you when you have a shower. And you feel the sense perceptions. And then you have breakfast. Again, people won't be speaking, so it will be a little easier to be there, in presence, in stillness. Now tomorrow we will speak, of course, when we meet, but we'll always go back into stillness, always back. You become very intelligent in that way. Because the stillness is pure intelligence, and that's only one aspect of it. But whether or not you become better at solving IQ tests, that we don't know. It's not that kind of intelligence. It's deeper than that. There's far greater depth to intelligence than the ability to solve little puzzles. Creative intelligence. I don't want to offend anybody who is good at IQ tests, but so a few reminders. Being in the body, especially when you lie in bed. And when you sit here also, of course, it's very helpful. Recognize that no thought is that important. And it's always only an aspect of the truth. It's not the truth. If that small aspect, small fragment. And often the opposite is also true. And to know the total truth, you'd have to hold them both together. Not a means to an end. Any little activity that you do it fully, so that it's not serving a future goal. It's because that next thing is not going to be that much bigger than this thing. Be fully in every step. Of course you'll miss quite a few times, but it doesn't matter. And you notice a strange thing when you do that. You notice how your relationships, people talk about relationships and they always mean it's relationships, intimate relationships with other humans. But the most common relationships are the relationships in the world of objects. Nobody would ever pay much attention to that. You're always relating to some objects because you're sitting on them, you wear them, you touch them, handle them. Continuously there's the world of so-called inanimate objects around you. And it's completely ignored mostly unless some very spectacular object suddenly comes into your life and somebody gives you a gold bracelet or whatever. But usually, don't pay much attention. It's a means to an end, because the present moment is a means to an end. The world of objects are means to ends, and they're handled in that way. And then a strange thing, a shift happens when suddenly the moment is not a means to an end. Then the world of objects becomes more alive suddenly. It has beingness, it has presence. Every object has beingness and presence, as the great artists knew, who sometimes painted the most insignificant, seemingly insignificant objects that nobody would have looked at twice. And now you have to pay $15,000 to buy the painting of an old chair. And somebody looked without the interference of mental labels and thought, truly looked at the most insignificant of possible, if you could think of, an old, cheap, rickety chair, and looked and saw a depth there far beyond the form that appears. Of course, the depth was also in him. And somehow that got on the canvas, the essence of that realization, the essence of perceiving in that deep way, without the interference of thought, somehow is still there in this work of art. And so to see when you handle the world of objects more consciously, that every object is alive too. You will almost feel as if it had its own rudimentary field of consciousness. And you'll notice that the world of objects has a relationship with you. Ultimately, you're not separate, you're one. And ultimately, it's not outside of you anyway. Let's just pretend for a moment that it is. I've observed a few people who are totally immersed in their mind continuously, and they're always at odds with the world of objects. They break things, they lose things, things break down for no apparent reason. There's always something that goes wrong for them, as if the world of objects even were against them, let alone in the human world. It's the antagonistic relationship to life that is even there in your relationship to objects, let alone human interactions, when you live in that way. So here, be aware of when it makes a noise, there's a little noise when you touch something, the shoes, whatever. And And so there comes a loving, not love, I would say, a lovingness also towards the world of objects. No longer a fighting attitude towards the world of objects, but a lovingness. As long as you deny the now, you're in a fighting relationship even with the world of objects, let alone humans. By becoming friendly with the now, the first, you also become friendly with the so-called inanimate world, and it's not really inanimate. And it's a beautiful thing when you see that the objects are also treated with loving care, in that, not a means to an end. So here, be conscious of your interaction with the world of objects. I do strange things occasionally. Sometimes I pick something up, it just happens. A knife, a fork in the kitchen, or a mug, or a pen, and just hold it and look and feel. And sometimes even a can with something in it, a metal can with baked beans in it or something, and you, oh, it has a presence too. So there are all these little things here, little practices, ways in which to be, to interact. Attention. Now. I know for sure, although I can't tell you how, that when you give attention in that way, full attention to an object or person, it changes. It does something. Physicists realize that the first time when they notice that the observer who conducts the experiment influences the experiment. The very fact that you're observing changes it. And if you had a stone here and you give it attention, and you have it in your home, and you occasionally look at it, if you could examine the molecular structure, you would notice changes. It's just a little aside. Don't need to believe that. No need to believe anything here, that's a good thing. So we will keep, as the Buddhists say, noble silence. Stay alert. What we are moving beyond is a personalized existence. And we realize that neither the unconscious state of identification with mind and emotions, nor the state of presence that is arising is personal. There's nothing personal with being unconscious, and there's nothing personal with being conscious. And that's a great liberation. There's nothing personal in it, not a me. The essence of the unconscious state is to look for me, the person, either to look in it in its future projection of me as the one who is going to be enlightened and seek an enhanced person in that, or to make all movements of thought and the emotional fluctuations that go with it into a personal thing, not recognizing that anger is human anger. It's basically the same vibration, no matter in whom it appears. Fear, sadness, any other emotions to do with mental machinery, jealousy, this and that. They are human emotions. There's not a person. What complete identification with that causes the illusion that there's somebody there, an entity. So, in the unenlightened state, your life becomes difficult because you personalize the flux of emotions and the stream of thoughts. Because thoughts are, again, human thoughts, the human mind. And identification with the thought stream as me, that's nobody's personal problem, that's the human condition. So it's great to see that there is nothing personal in it, neither here nor there. And also see that there's a tendency in each one to perpetuate the personal sense of self, rather than being a greater opening into life, a manifestation of the one life that expresses itself through this form, which nature is beautifully. Then we create an enclosed sense of self, that tendency can come up. You observe it in yourself many times, to personalize. Somebody wrote a book that's been on many bestseller lists. I've only looked at a few pages, and I only saw one page. The book is called The Four Agreements. I only remember one of them, and that's take nothing personally. Expressed very simply there. He doesn't go into the detail that, although what I'm saying is not complex, but he doesn't even explain with all that. He just says simply, don't take anything personally. Because when you personalize, you immediately enter into a reactive relationship with life. The personal selfhood strengthens itself through reactivity. And you gain a stronger sense of self through it. Stronger illusion, stronger person. It feels better for a while because you have fortified the illusion. So as you identify with the reactive force, on one level it feels good. To the illusion it feels good because it has strengthened itself. And now your identification with a position, a mental, and then emotions energize that. And you think you're defending some great truth, which is mental, and there's no absolute truth in the mental realm, but you believe at that time you're defending a great truth. And of course you're defending an illusion. That's the reason. And it feels good to the illusion, not to you, but you don't know that. That illusion, which sometimes we could call ego, always confuses pleasure and pain. And the wonderful thing is, as we are stepping out of that, you are no longer identified with mental positions. A me is no longer in. You can still have opinions, but they are not energized by a personal sense of self. You are not in it anymore. And you realize the relativity of every opinion, and then it's fine to have opinions. And you could even listen to somebody else's opinion, contrary or complete opposite of yours, and say, oh, yeah, that's interesting, that's another perspective on it. I still prefer my perspective, but that one is valid too. The Buddha talked about this. He used the expression, I believe the translation is, the thicket of opinions, and it's often emphasized in Buddhism to let go of opinions, but it really means to let go of identification with opinions that give you a me position. If you hold the space of presence and there's a group of people, if you start speaking, sharing, some people will express mental positions, perhaps. And just as you recognize mental positions in yourself, you recognize mental positions in others. And allow that. You don't counteract it with your position. And other minds, there's only one mind, but it looks like different minds in different people. The mind will try to draw you into positions and reaction. When you facilitate a group, the alertness, the alert presence that does all the work, will almost automatically rise as you hold the space of a group, and there's no body doing it. The dimmer switch, the degree of presence rises, just as it would if you were challenged by a critical situation, a danger situation. The intensity, the alertness rises, and you feel it throughout the body. A more intense aliveness. And that is the state in which, as one could say, you're holding the space of presence. Presence is doing it, but we're just using language. You're holding the space of presence. The easiest way to hold the space of presence is when nobody is speaking. So the easiest way to have a group is to have an agreement that nobody's going to say a word. That's one way. That avoids many problems. But even there, the qualitative difference of that group, there will be a great difference in the energy field if there's only one person, even if it's just one person who is able to remain in the state of thoughtless awareness, of just being here. That has an enormous effect on the quality. And many others can be drawn, if only temporarily, into that state. And then to listen to a tape or for a little while can help also to deepen that state. And after listening, return into some stillness, and again you will see others are drawn, and then the field of presence becomes a collective field in the room. And that has gives an enormous help to enter the collective field of presence. It has nothing to do with emotions, or as you sometimes find in meetings of a religious nature, where we generate an emotion. Of course, as you know, it has nothing to do with emotion. So to a pool, when humans meet in the state of presence, there is a pool, one could say, all language is limited, but a pool of presence. And each apparent individual can draw on that and contributes to that. It's a two-way process. That is also the sacredness of groups that meet in that field, because the field of presence is sacred, beyond religion or belief systems. When the mind interprets it, it could say there was strong Christ presence there, yes. Or Buddha nature, just different names. So, just the simplest gathering of that kind has a powerful effect not only on those people that are gathered, but also on the totality. And that it was no coincidence, because everything is connected, everything is part of a larger whole, that We had our gathering with almost 400 people for 1 week, last week, and it happened to coincide in space and time, both space and time. It happened to coincide with the extreme expressions of human insanity that were taking place not far from there, not far in space and time, very close. There was, it seems, an intensification of the insanity, and almost simultaneously an intensification of something else arising. And that was almost 400 people for 1 week. It was perhaps the most powerful retreat we've had. And before I didn't know, does a retreat work with almost 400 people? Can that still work? And the answer is yes. It worked beautifully. So the collective pool of presence that then not only draws out that unconditioned consciousness that is beyond the conditioned mind, but also feeds it. It's a growth happens there, of an arising, and then it emanates. And many who are even slightly open to it will benefit from it, no matter how distant they are in space. Slight openness, and it makes it easier for everyone in whom presence is already arising, through this form. It's like, always use that expression, the flowering of consciousness. Something, a new dimension, suddenly coming into this world. So the simplest group already works, meeting in silence, listening maybe to a talk, more silence, and then everybody goes home. That's one way. And if you facilitate it, you may notice as people arrive, your alertness rises, it intensifies. It's not a social occasion. Just as it can at this moment, as I point this out, what does it mean, alertness rises? If suddenly this door opened and a bear walked into this room, your alertness would rise. Or it would fall, and you would start screaming, and probably do the wrong thing, completely wrong. Or the alertness rises. Or you're driving a critical moment, suddenly incredible alertness, no fear in it. I sometimes call it the dimmer, it's like a dimmer switch. The degree of presence can be just in the background, or it can become intense. And that is the intensity that Zen masters point to. And that's the intensity of just this. And if you move away 1 inch, I'll hit you with a stick, says the Zen master. So it arises. It's not consciously willed. It's an opening, rather than you cannot try to be present, because all trying means you're trying to reach some point in the future. That's the nature of trying. I need to become more present. But there's no trying in presence. Presence is now. It's rather, all mental noise subsides, and that arises. And there comes the bear into the room, and you look. And you are completely in a state of not knowing in that. At least nothing that the mind would call knowing, words or concepts. That alertness would be there if you were looking at a stunning scenery, very spectacular. And there's this expression, the word is awe. Maybe comes because people say, oh. So there's actually a word now, onomatopoeiga, whatever it's called, A-W-E. The state of awe is that state of open, this is presence. There's no mind in that state of that openness. And that intensifies when you are in a group situation. The space, the spaciousness. Now, later I'm going to ask for from your experience, what you have learned already from groups, mistakes you have made, if there are mistakes, what worked for you, what didn't work. The next level is, perhaps at some point, words are coming out of your mouth without being drawn into mind identification, so that thought is only giving form to that which arises from beyond thought. No old thought, your viewpoints or your opinions or your beliefs, and I'm going to tell you what's right, or facile explanations. That all comes from the accumulated knowledge of the mind. And that applies even people who have suffered tragedy, people in recent events or in their personal lives, so-called personal. Some mental explanation that I believe it was Billy Graham, there's nothing, he's a wonderful man, but he said they're all in heaven now, there's nothing to worry about, all those people who died. That may be true, but it's a belief, and is he really meeting those people who are suffering? I'm not going to give you any methodology or what to do in groups. What it needs to arise organically out of presence, but just a few pointers. What you do will arise, what works will arise from within organically, so not applying some method. You don't need that. It would be an alien thing imposed. And when there's presence, that's not needed. If you speak, my suggestion would be that the first words direct people into the body, so that their attention moves from the head to a deeper level. So you lead people into the body, and there may be some people who are new and who've never been in the body before. For 40, 50 years, they've never been in the body. And it may be meaningless. They feel the inner body. They say, what? Where? It doesn't make sense. I can't work that out. What do you mean? The easiest device getting people into the body, and I've used it a few times, and it works, even for people who've never been there, is you can do this with anybody, your grandparents, your grandmother, any little child. No understanding is required. To just say, and some of you have heard me say that before, hold up your right hand or left hand, close your eyes. Is there any way you can know, without touching anything or moving your hand, or opening your eyes, without any of this, is there any way you can know whether your right hand is there, still there? Is there any way you can find out, without moving it or touching anything or looking at it, whether your right hand is still there? You ask that question. And that question will direct their attention, after a little while, into the inner feeling of right hand. So it'll take their attention. First they'll try to work out mentally, is there any way I can know? No, I can't. And then you ask that question again. Perhaps you can find out. And so the attention then, for some people it's a revelation. For the first time they can feel that something in the body is alive. And they feel, yes, there's a subtle sense of aliveness where my right hand is. And they feel a very subtle flow of aliveness there. And then you will point out, right, you've entered the body. That's the beginning of it. And that is, for some people, it's a beautiful revelation. And they are surprised that there is actually aliveness there. They had never even thought that there could be aliveness in the body. They might have been concerned with their external physical body and how it looks, but never felt a deep inner aliveness there. And there it is. And then, see if you can do it with the other hand, find out if that's still there. Oh, that can then work more quickly. And then bring the two together into one feeling, feel them both at the same time. Oh. And at first, it works beautifully, and the strange thing is, feeling your hands immediately sensitizes you more to feeling other parts of the body, even if they are not specifically pointed out. So by entering your hands, through your hands, this could be the entry point, it's very easily felt for most people. Already there's greater aliveness even in those parts that are not specifically addressed yet. And particularly if you've done this for a while, you can enter the body from anywhere and suddenly the aliveness is there all over. You can use any entry point. And so this is a beautiful thing you can do for people who come, and then gradually take them into the rest of the body and feel can you sense also that your feet are equally alive? Equally. And so gradually develop this ability to sense different parts of the body as one. There was a teacher called Jean Klein, who I believe he used that expression, a global sense of beingness or aliveness, global presence, meaning all over. And a few pointers are then needed to point out the significance of feeling the inner body, because otherwise the mind will dismiss it and say, this is not important. Yes, it feels good, but I've got other things to worry about. So if it's not understood, the mind needs a little bit of understanding, then it's easier to see why. What is the significance of being in the body? And so you explain the vast intelligence that undoubtedly is in the body, in every cell, in every organ, in the DNA. So vast that no human mind and not all the computers put together could coordinate the functions of the body, not even a tiny percentage of it. So you are connecting with an intelligence that is greater than what you had thought of as intelligence, which is just the human mind. Not separate from it, but vaster. So the vastness begins by entering what looks like this limited little thing, the body, but it is only the doorway. So the entry point into that vastness is through that doorway. And realize you're now connecting with that greater intelligence that dwells in there. And you can also point out that you may notice that when you sense the inner body, less thinking is taking place in your mind, because you cannot simultaneously be in your body and have a lot of thought activity in your head, because your consciousness is either consumed by thought, in which case consciousness continuously is being born into forms, or you can have your consciousness, instead of going out into form, returning back into the formless, and the formless one life, one consciousness of which the mind is only an expression. So it's a reversal. So you point out, people will notice that the mind becomes stiller as you enter the body. And people are not becoming less intelligent, but more intelligent, because they connect with that greater intelligence, that vastness. And you just need to point that out, that it is also the beginning of the inner realm of stillness as they enter within, out of which all great creations have come in this world. Artists, some of the creative scientists, all created out of the decisive moments of realization were always stillness, preceded by stillness. And probably an aliveness in the body, even if they didn't know it, they were sitting there and that is the creative state of total openness and receptivity. Boredom, there's no such thing in that state. Boredom is the mind trying to look for the next thing and not finding it. That's boredom. Boredom means you're in your mind. If you're sitting here and you're bored, it's a clear indication you're in your mind. There's nothing wrong with that, just know it. Because sitting here is not boring, but it's boring because there's vital aliveness to this gathering. But if you cannot feel your body as you sit here, you'll be bored. There's not enough for the mind. And the same also that when people come to a gathering, to point out what boredom is. Because the mind can easily become bored in a gathering. And to point, what does that mean? Boredom means the mind is looking for the next thing to get born into, identification with the next thought, or the next external interesting thing, or the next thing it could react to. And so be born, it seeks rebirth in Buddhist terms. The mind seeks continuously to be reborn into some new form. And that could be a reaction. Okay, now, that's the egoic mind. Or it could be a thought it identifies with, which is where I'm going to be tomorrow. You flow into that. Reaction's our favorite one, of course. It's a strong rebirth. Every time you react, it's a very powerful rebirth of me. So the mind seeks that continuous rebirth, or it could be an emotion that you identify with as me that happens, and it could be anger or heaviness, and it becomes, you're born into, you identify with that, it becomes personalized, it's a me, it fuels further thought, which more form identity. And so if you point those simple things out that enable people to become aware of their basic inner processes, and this has to not just be pointed out once, because the mind will forget it, obscure it, and maybe not even listen. Almost at every meeting, you may need to point out what the mind tends to do. At this very moment, you may be in a state of boredom, you may be in a state of restlessness, and if it's the case, simply to observe that. What does it? It means you're in the mind and looking for another birth. Maybe you already found another birth. You found something to react to right here and now. In which case, congratulations, you achieved another rebirth into a stronger sense of me through the reactive force. Great, it worked again. That is the deeper meaning. In Buddhism, in popular Buddhism, when they talk about the end of rebirth, they think it's a cosmic thing that you finally achieve, perhaps in 2,000 years' time, or another 100 incarnations, when you finally achieve the state in which you will no longer be reborn. Whereas the deeper meaning of that is immediate. To recognize the deeper meaning of rebirth, identification with form. So rebirth happens at this moment. And you're seeking rebirth at this moment. And freedom from rebirth is possible at this moment. Now, this is the essence of truth, and it can be pointed out very simply. You may have to do it every time people come, because the mind will forget it and deny it. Oh, yes. And then you can watch that process in yourself. And as you teach, you learn. It deepens in yourself, because learning and teaching are not really two. You teach and you learn at the same time. That's the beauty, because you are not ultimately separate from those beings. It is a single process, teaching and learning. What comes out of my mouth is always determined by the energy field of the group. If the group didn't draw it out of this form, nothing would happen. And sometimes what comes out of the mouth varies. It depends on the collective field of the group. This form is not separate from those forms. It's one. The ancient saying, the teacher and the taught together produce the teaching. It is not, and again, not falling into the illusion that you personalize your function, the function of this form, and you personalize that, and then you see yourself as a teacher. Then you get trapped again. There's a new rebirth of me in the head, an image identity of me in the head, and you have now become a teacher. Congratulations. Another rebirth. It worked again. And that is a subtle trap for people. Anybody who's temporarily performs the function of facilitating, that you identify with the function and it becomes another sense of self. And then in a very subtle sense you feel that you are teaching, and then you're walking to the supermarket and you're no longer a simple human, you're now a spiritual teacher. And you carry that around with you. And if you become very successful as a spiritual teacher, then other people will project a form identity onto you. Because truth flows through the form, so they perceive the form as special. not realizing that truth is one, and it's equally in everyone. It's only a question of to what extent it is obscured, that's all. But there's an equal amount of truth in everyone. And, or as I put it last week at the retreat, nobody is closer to God than you are. And the illusion that somebody else is closer to God is another egoic illusion. So that's a beautiful realization. But if you become successful, and you may, because there's an enormous longing for truth now, and before you know it, there may have been a great opening in you, and suddenly truth flows through you. You emanate it as peace and aliveness and presence, and the words that you speak come out of that also. And then, of course, the beautiful thing is challenges always come. Then your challenge is people will project an image of you. For a while you keep yourself clear of images, you remain in the state of openness, and the moment people leave, you're not a spiritual teacher anymore, it's only a function, not an identity that you carry around. So when you go to the supermarket, you go as simply a field of presence, walking, floating, looking at the shelves. You don't carry the burden of an identity, but people will project the identity. The more successful you become as a teacher, so to speak, the more powerful the teaching is, that means people will project some form identity onto you. And you get bombarded by that, perhaps. And after a few years or a few months, suddenly you are somebody again. It's happened to some teachers. You can sometimes see in some teachers even the change from the earlier photos, where they're so simple, and the later photos when they've become successful gurus. And that can happen quickly these days because there's so much coming through now. So before you know it, some of you could have turned into gurus. And so that's another beautiful challenge, to recognize the projections of a form identity, and not to hang on, so that the openness remains. On one hand, you may never feel ready to teach the truth. The mind says, no, I'm not ready yet, not yet, I'll just wait a bit more, I'm not ready yet. And you'll never feel ready. That is one movement of the mind. Not good enough. I'm not good enough yet. Don't know enough yet. What am I going to tell them? I don't know that much. Not knowing, you hardly need to know anything. There were some very great spiritual teachers who knew almost nothing on the level of knowledge. And even Jesus, each person in this room, I'm sure, is more highly educated than Jesus was. It's obvious there wasn't that much knowledge around at the time. And according to all accounts, wasn't even highly educated, even according to the standards of the time. You don't need more knowledge, that's for sure, to become a teacher. But the mind will say, I don't know enough yet. I need to know a bit more. To be effective as an instrument for transformation, this form becomes an instrument for the transformation of consciousness. To be effective, that does not depend on adding anything more to yourself. in any realm or dimension. It is not an adding to who you are. Neither knowledge nor great firework spiritual experiences that come and go, but that you could remember and then add to that, or just life experience, even that don't need. It's not an adding, it's that the truth is already shining as the stillness that is underneath thought. The sun is already there. What can you add to that? Nothing. So it is not true that you need to acquire anything more to become an effective instrument of transformation. So one movement of the mind says, no, I just need to wait. There may be another movement of the mind that says, I really want to be a spiritual teacher. At the same time it says, but I'm not quite ready yet, or maybe I'm ready now. Again, the desire to be a spiritual teacher. There was one master who announced he already had followers and said, I've detected in myself a desire to be a spiritual teacher, so I've stopped. I'm dissolving our group, our gathering. This is it. Go home. So it's a very subtle thing. On the one hand, you never feel ready. Not good enough. Wanting to be great and good. I want to become that. Nothing is needed. No further understanding is necessary to be effective. No further understanding. Course in Miracles goes so far as to say, there's nothing that you need to understand. And it says, your understanding is not a powerful contribution to the truth. So what is it then? It is simply the state of presence, and you don't need to understand more to be present. It's a letting go of even what you think you knew. And then the opening is there. Now, I've heard from some people who teach, and they already become an instrument for transformation, but occasionally in their private lives they get drawn back into rebirth. They are reborn into reactivity, they are reborn into a mental image, they are reborn into identification with their pain body, they are reborn into identification with mental noise and the heavy me, and then they think, oh, I must be a fraud because I'm obviously not living it. There I am, and then here I am. I'm not living it, I must be a fraud. And somebody that comes to your gathering may even catch you in a state of rebirth. And say, oh, I thought you were free of that. Shouldn't you be free of that? You can still be effective as a teacher even if your entire life is not yet an expression, 100% expression of absolute continuous presence. It's not a requirement. You would have to wait a long time. But what will happen is that the moments of rebirth will be shorter. There will not be a long, drawn-out rebirth, like hanging on to one reaction, to one belief structure or pattern, or one emotion. Hang on, and goes on and on. It will be short. You will find shorter and shorter rebirth. And again, not creating again, because the egoic thing is so subtle. It comes in. You've discovered. You've seen how it works there, and then it comes in from here. You've just looked at egoic mind structure there. Oh, I see it so clearly, and there it is. I read the other day this beautiful joke about there's a priest and a rabbi praying in the holy city of Jerusalem, and the rabbi is overcome by the presence of God, and he falls to his knees and shouts, "There's only God, I am nobody." And the priest suddenly is also overcome by the presence of God, and the priest also shouts, "Yes, there's nobody, I am nobody." And a few steps away, a street sweeper stops sweeping the street and looks at them, and the street sweeper also falls to his knees and shouts, "I am nobody." And the priest looks at the rabbi and says, "Look who thinks he's nobody." That's how cunning the ego is. But some people who have gatherings engage in prolonged eye contact with people, called gazing. Some people love it. Other people think it's weird. And you can turn off many people who first come to you if you do that. And what's so what is the significance then of gazing, and is it necessary, or what does it do? Well, in some groups it becomes an automatic thing. Whenever you meet somebody, you feel almost compelled to gaze. And if the perception of the other person happens in the field of stillness, in other words, while you're gazing, there's no thought arising. That is quite a beautiful, actually a transmission of presence, but not, no, you don't feel it. I am giving you presence, and yet, first of all, it is a transmission, but it awakens presence in the other, because you look through the mental, emotional screen in the other person. You're not even interested. Even if you could read their minds while you look, some people can, you wouldn't, because it's not that interesting. It's it's like listening to gossip. You might put your ear to the door, there are people next door gossiping, and then after a while, at first you realize it's not really that interesting. And so the human mind isn't really that interesting, so you look through that, and there's a deeper connection that is a deep knowing of the other person, and you might not even know their name or their history. And you know the other person more deeply. Nothing that you would know about this form could add to the depth of knowing, and that knowing is beyond the mind. And that knowing is not separate from the state of connectedness that is love in the highest sense, not the egoic love. And that is the true meaning of gazing, is there is presence flowing between you. And even if the other person's mind is not still, and it may not be, it is enough if one person's mind is still and the gazing happens, and there's simply presence, complete stillness flowing through. And that awakens that in the other. One could say almost it draws it out. Something responds. Now, that's a beautiful thing. When it happens, and it happens spontaneously, not necessarily as something that you always feel you need to do it. It happens when the moment is right. And gazing can be not necessarily so prolonged even that it becomes noticeable. I pointed out last night you can gaze at the shopkeeper or the supermarket cashier while you hand over your money. And all that it means is there's stillness. There's complete presence in this moment, and there's a field of stillness in which the perception happens, but in which also that connection happens, a deep inner connection. And it's unlikely that the shopkeeper or the supermarket cashier will be aware of that on a conscious level. He or she may just feel good about you and feel you're such a nice person, or feel good about him or herself for a moment. Or there may be so much mental noise that even that they can't feel, and that's fine too. And yet there's always something that happens within through bringing thoughtless awareness into your perceptions. That's teaching. Really, that is the essence and core of teaching, is you bring thoughtless awareness into whatever you perceive around you. That is the deeper meaning of, there's a Course in Miracles lesson which says, my holiness envelops the world. And the word my here goes beyond a personalized existence, personalized sense of self. To realize that, yes, that is a sacred space that we share at this moment. It is a sacred space. And our encounter is a sacred encounter. If that were all you knew, and that were all that your teaching ever were, to realize that every encounter is sacred with another human being, that would be enough to transform the world, if you just knew that every moment. But you cannot know it as a mental belief. There needs to be the reality of sacredness, not just the belief that it's sacred. It's nice to believe it, but if you only believe it, it's not enough to live it. To have a mental belief that it's sacred and you'll get drawn into reactivity 5 minutes later. But to hold that spaciousness of presence. And then gazing can be powerful. And at some point you may have to explain, if people come to you, what the significance of it is. And the stillness, that is the essence of gazing. But the most beautiful gazing happens when it's spontaneous and the other person doesn't even notice it as gazing, and you're not doing anything, it just happens. It basically happens with me whenever I'm with someone, whether I know them or not. Names I forget very quickly, and yet there's always a deep sense of knowing, even if I've never seen them before, a deep sense of connectedness beyond the story of the person or the idiosyncrasies of that particular form. That's only a temporary formation, a deep, and that is love, and that is what transforms the world, just knowing that. So be careful with in groups so that it doesn't become automatic. People get turned off by it. You do it, at first it may happen just a few moments. And then at some point you may explain what it means. Many people find eye contact threatening. and they believe that you're thinking something about them while you're looking, or they're afraid they could read their minds. Gazing at a human is exactly the same as looking at a flower in the state of thoughtless presence, which the flower responds to too, but you don't know that. The flower loves it just as the human loves it. All of nature loves it, to be recognized in their essence. Each form of life to be recognized in their essence. That really is just, you're saving the world, and to use an old-fashioned expression in that way. Each form, ultimately, through your recognition, recognizes itself. Two people gazing at each other and both of them engaged in mind activity doesn't do very much. But it's a beautiful thing for people who live together, partners, occasionally to just sit and be and look at each other and perhaps be in the body and become still and then look. That's also the state of listening. The state of gazing is the same state as the state of open, completely non-judgmental listening. We may talk about that in the afternoon, when you're with one person, to be in that state of, again, the sense perception. When you look, it's visual. When you listen to what the other person is saying, auditory sense perception, the sense perception is happening in and through a field of stillness. That's teaching. What do you need to know in that? It's happening in and through stillness. You look through the stillness. You listen through the stillness. It is being received by the stillness. It is known, but not conceptually. You know, but from the point of view of the mind, you don't know anything anymore. You bring the greater intelligence to your perceptions. The next step in groups is when people share. This is both a beautiful thing. They talk about their experiences of how they were present or not present in certain situations, or how they can bring presence into a certain situation. And that's a beautiful thing and requires very great alertness, because it is at that point where most easily the mind can take over, and then presence is lost and it degenerates into people expressing their positions, or one people trying to tell somebody else what's right. You should, or whatever. Or getting drawn into a story. You will have perhaps already have some experiences of that. A little helpful hint here, because you may find yourself speaking too, you contribute. And you can point out to the others in the group also this little hint, that whenever they have expressed what they want to say, a thought, movement, to step back, take one or two steps back, so to speak, internally, and step away from that thought movement. let it come to an end, and step back into simply an alert beingness or presence. Otherwise, thought proliferates, and you can find it in a group that the collective thought suddenly goes, and all you have, the whole group is then being dragged along in thought streams, opinions and this and that. Sometimes you can see it in one person. It can happen. People who talk, and one thought leads to another, and another. No gap. So when you have expressed a thought, not to continue in the stream of thought, to step out. You've said what you have to say, and then you step out of the thought. Your attention relinquishes the thought back into presence. So you don't hang on to that incarnation for longer than necessary. And stepping out, always back into stillness, back into presence. After a thought stream is to notice the ending of thought streams is very important, so that they don't proliferate. That is mind. So, because when you start speaking, this is a great challenge. When you start speaking to another person, a group shares this or that, words come, mind comes. So to then not lose the field of presence requires you not to get drawn into a mind stream, so that you can always step back and out. And the ability of, you can point out to people also, they can do that also, so that they don't get dragged along by their mind stream. And the ability of people, while one person is speaking, the ability of all others present to listen in a completely open and receptive way. And not to immediately counteract or react mentally to what that person is saying. And while that person is speaking, you're already formulating, that is a normal way, you're already formulating in your mind what you are going to say. And you can see it when it happens in people. While they're listening to you, they have 20% of their attention on what you are saying, and 80% of their attention is in their thought processes that they are going to come out of your mouth in a second, and they're now being prepared. and your sense of self is in, of course, that's what really matters, is in here to you. I say 20%. Sometimes they're just peripherally aware of what you're saying, because what they're really waiting for is to tell you what they're preparing in the head, their position. And of course there's the famous words between partners, "You're not listening to me. Why don't you listen?" As the inability to listen is widespread. And you can notice it even here. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll talk again at lunchtime, maybe we won't. Somebody talks, and perhaps you can be a bit more aware of these processes that happen. Is it possible to listen to the other person in spaciousness, with no no answer being prepared in your head? But then, of course, the mind created self feels less through that, because if no answer comes, I seem to be shrinking. I need to put forward my viewpoint, and that I am somebody. Through that, I am someone. I stand out. I have an opinion. I know better. I exist. Exist means to stand out. Out. You're coming out of yourself. And not to be in that state is, I'm disappearing. What am I going to say next? I don't know. Maybe there's nothing to say. And you may be surprised that sometimes when you haven't prepared anything, after a moment of stillness, something may come out of your mouth. And it may be much more powerful than anything that could have come if it had been prepared mentally. It may be more simple too. But you get challenged by minds, the human mind, the collective human mind, coming to you in the form of human beings, persons. And that is the challenge, whether it's in a teaching situation or in personal relationships. It's the same challenge of the mind form pretending that it is absolutely important, that something in the mental realm is absolutely important. My viewpoint, my position, this, give me, and please believe that this matters. And so the spaciousness around it is lost. Well, it's not lost, but you don't know it's there. The spaciousness around thought. Once you know the spaciousness around thought, you can even play with thought. You can say, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, or whatever it is in Canada. I can never get Canadian politics. I don't understand. It's complicated. But Democrats, Republican is simple. Oh yes, identification with that. You can have a preference. Maybe you thought that Al Gore would have been a better president than George Bush. You may be right, but you may be wrong. Who knows? As Byron Katie says, do you really know this to be true? So the essence we've just spoken about of having groups. The rest is how, once you know the essence, that's all that's needed. The rest is how you do it in the world of form, varies from group to group and person to person. If you have groups, and here this morning we'll just mainly address groups. If you have gatherings at home, if there's anything you want to contribute, you can either say what you may have a question concerning one or two aspect of it, or you may have learned something there, something you did first, and then you learned, and it could help others to say what it is that you learned, what before you did it in this way, and then that didn't work, and then you did something else. Or anything to do with groups. Some people have, before I open for questions, little cards, and you read, you know these New Age cards, but some people have cards from Power of Now teachings or something, and that is nice. A person takes a card, and then you have it's a thought, of course. The thought always points beyond itself. Then you read the thought, and you have a stillness around it. That's a beautiful pointer, each person taking a card. Because some of it may yet be beyond a person's own experience. And so reactivity comes in. But there's no need to be afraid of it. Why not let people react and hold that space? It's quite good to occasionally to be challenged. And that's the essence of why this person was there, is to learn that there is another dimension. And so the card actually pointed to the essence. But the little mind-made self got frightened.
And you got my one frightened too.
Yes. So you may encounter, this is interesting, sometimes people can get angry. The pain body can get triggered in a gathering. And that's a beautiful challenge too. What is possible then, that the whole group energy can become turbulent and everybody gets pulled into pain body. So it's more likely to happen with people who are relatively new to the group. Others, they know about the pain body, and when it comes up in them, they can be with it. They might even say, at this very moment, my pain body has been triggered, and that there's a spaciousness around it when they point it out, and that's beautiful. So as quickly as possible to explain certain things to people who are relatively new. I often do that in large groups when I point out that some of you may experience, while you sit here, you may experience sudden restlessness. You may experience your pain body coming up. You may experience strong mind movements. Point out the obstacles that may come up for them. You may experience boredom as you sit here. If they don't know it, they identify with the boredom, and then say, no. So then they can see inner states arising, and in the seeing, there's a spaciousness around inner states. So it's good, maybe a few basic points when new people come, explain them what could happen here, how reactions that may come, and when they come, to be aware that's what it is. It's a reaction. And it's good to be reminded, the group, you cannot be reminded often enough of those things. As you sit here, you explain briefly what the pain body is. That may come up. You explain the egoic entity, the me, with its identifications. You don't need at this point necessarily to use the expression rebirth. So for some people that sounds too esoteric. And it also can happen, and you may have, once the group has a certain size, life does things in such a way that there'll often be one person in the group that's difficult. There's always someone who's difficult. And that could be a great teacher, that difficult person, for everybody, to hold a spaciousness around that difficult person. Sometimes people who almost despite themselves feel drawn. It's almost as if they didn't want to be there, but yet they are there, because the personality doesn't want to be there, but something deeper draws them there. I had an extreme case of that. A woman in London I knew with a very strong ego, and she would go to all spiritual teachers. Whenever there was a new spiritual teacher in town, she would be there, and she would always sit. And she said to me, "I've seen them all, and I laugh at them all." But there was something deeper that she couldn't keep away. Her mind condemned the teachers. She always immediately found something to condemn, whatever it was, and yet she couldn't keep away. It's beautiful to see. So let's see if there's any questions that arise from groups, or something that you have already learned, or any difficulties you've experienced. Feel free. Oh, yeah.
One of the things that John and I do together is we lead a non-denominational worship service at the county jail every week. And most of the men that are drawn to this are from a more fundamental Christian perspective, even though we bring in Buddhist and Taoist teachings and so forth. But they have a fairly simple faith. And so part of what we are concerned with is honoring where they are, because most of them, it's their faith that has caused them to say, I can live in this world in a different way. But I learned something very profound from two of these men. One was he had just had a born-again experience, and he just saw truth in a very narrow way, and I think he needed to, because that was the way he was making a choice. And I was trying to just come from presence in every experience with him and be open-hearted. And one night, he was really preaching kind of hard. And I was concerned. My mind became concerned that the rest of the men in the group would be having a problem with this, because some of them looked kind of confused. And so I began trying to give him a broader perspective of truth. And he was crushed that he had done something wrong. And I realized that this had not come from a place of presence in me. And then there's another young man who revealed that he sees himself as a channel for a new way of looking at the truth. And he speaks in a very authoritative way. And it was of some concern to me, because the other men were really confused. He was out there from a different place. And yet I was able to keep coming back to presence and coming back to presence. And so one night John wasn't there. He was away, and this came up. And I was able to come back into a place of presence with it. And one of the other men asked a very innocent, simple question that just changed the whole energy. And this one young man said, "Oh no, this is just what I believe. This isn't something that I know to be the truth." And it shifted the whole energy. And what I learned from that is that my job as a facilitator was to keep coming back to presence and to allow presence to lead the service.
Yes, that's very good. The moment, as you say, everything shifted, the moment he was no longer identified with what his mind was saying, no longer identified, and that is what I sometimes call the spaciousness around thought. He was no longer in the thought. Suddenly he recognized, this is just what I believe. And the spaciousness, and that is immediately the shift in the whole energy field changes when it moves out of mind identification. And the teacher, the facilitator, whatever you want to call it, the function is never to tell anybody that they are wrong. But to be there as the spaciousness around whatever they're saying. And never to attack the mental position.